Chapter 12. To the aid of Abel Magwitch. Abel Magwitch was my convict's name. He had come to contact with Mr. Jaggers as the lawyer had defended his case. Mr. Jaggers had saved him from hanging, but the condition was that he had to leave England forever and settle in New South Wales, Australia. Magwitch's arrival did bring complications, and I decided to solve one problem at a time. My snooping landlady was informed that my uncle had come to visit me. But finding other quarters for Magwitch was inevitable, with Herbert's slated to return from his business trip soon. Magwitch ate a hearty breakfast the next morning and with great satisfaction, and lit up his pipe after filling it with a black, evil-smelling tobacco. "Pip, you must have your own horses, with a carriage and a servant to drive you," he proposed, and tossed a purse full of money on the table. "Here is something that's worth spending, dear boy. There is more from where that came from. I have come to see my gentleman spend money like a gentleman does. That will be my satisfaction." I restrained him with a raised hand. "We must not talk about all this. We must think how to keep you safe during your stay here. How long do you intend to stay?" I asked. He gave me a surprised look. "Dear boy, I am back for good. Dyed hair, elegant clothes, and spectacles will disguise me to keep me safe," Magwitch replied. I convinced him that the outfit of a rich farmer would suit his sunburned face and workman-like hands much better. But I decided to visit Mr. Jaggers before I purchased the clothes. He exchanged a look with Mr. Wemmick as I entered his office, and Jaggers hissed, "No names," before I could utter a single word. "Yes, Mr. Jaggers, I have a visitor from New South Wales who informs me that he is my benefactor. Is that the truth?" I asked. "Yes, it is," Jaggers replied. I was always led to believe that it was Miss Havisham. In fact, it was you who let me believe so," I said wildly. "No," Jaggers objected. "I never did. Miss Havisham might have reassured you in developing this fanciful notion, but she was just entertaining her sick mind." I was totally sure that Magwitch was my benefactor now, and I rushed home to rent rooms for him, which were closer to mine. The farmer's clothes I purchased for him did not suffice to change his looks or transform him into an ordinary citizen. He dropped off to sleep in the armchair that night, dressed in his new clothes. As I watched him, there was nothing more I wanted than to escape from the room, out of London and out of the country, but I stayed where I was, seeking comfort in that fact that Herbert would be back soon to offer his invaluable advice. Magwitch refused to let me tell Herbert all about him until he had met him personally and was absolutely certain that he could be trusted. It took Magwitch just 5 minutes after Herbert had walked in to nod at me and take out a faded Bible. He swore Herbert to complete secrecy on it. I took Magwitch to his new rooms, and when I returned, Herbert and I discussed the matter at depth till late into the night. I eventually arrived at the decision of not taking another cent from Belwitch, even though I was untrained in any professional capacity and heavily in debt. That money belongs to a criminal, I said with repulsion. Herbert shook his head. I know how you feel, Pip, but he will be destroyed if you refuse his money. This is what he has lived for all his life. Why, I think he will surrender to the authorities if you do not buy a carriage and horses. I will not take any further part in this with him, I cried with passion. I don't want his money. I only want him to leave. Then if you don't want to be responsible for his arrest and hanging, you must convince him to leave England, Herbert offered. He won't do that, I exclaimed. You must accompany him then, Herbert said, as I stared at him, shell-shocked. After you have ensured his safety, Herbert continued, you can always come back and work with me at Claricus, he reasoned. I realized this was the only option that I had left now. While I was making arrangements to do as Herbert had suggested, I was summoned by Estella to her home. I am to be married soon, she informed me coolly. I did warn you, you know. The groom-to-be was Bentley Drummle, whom I considered to be a disgusted spider, and I protested naturally and vociferously. All Estella did was shrug her shoulders casually. It is a suitable match. He is a wealthy after all, and I have decided on it as well. Chapter 13. A Murderous. I walked around London despondently after leaving Estella. It is true that I was no longer in a financial position to ask her to marry me, but it was especially harsh on me that she had chosen the sulky Drummle of all men. Her parting statement hadn't been comforting either. Don't think for a moment that I shall make him happy, Estella had proclaimed with sarcastic smile. I returned rather late to my rooms and I opened the door to be greeted by a figure jerking out of sleep by the fire. I was as startled as the intruder, but it was only Mr. Wemmick. He urged me to silence by putting a finger to his lips and gestured for me to come closer. Please forgive me for startling you, Mr. Pip, he said in a whisper. Herbert gave me the key. Beyond that, we must not use any names. You understand? I nodded my assent, although my heart was beating like a drum. Is everything all right? I whispered back. Yes, and I know, replied Mr. Wemmick as I sat down beside him. It might have come to your notice that Mr. Jaggers has clients of various kinds. Not all of them belong to the best class of people, of course, but the kind of person has access to information that you and I would not normally learn about, as we don't drink in a particular low saloons or have friends belonging to the criminal class. I was about to object to the last statement but decided to keep quiet. Mr. Wemmick continued. One such low person passes all the gossip he has overheard to Mr. Jaggers, mainly because he wishes to keep on the good side of Mr. Jaggers in the event that he requires his professional service some day. Today, news reached us that a man called Campy Sun is spreading the rumor that a man from New South Wales is in London. The rumour will reach the authorities for sure. Mr. Wemmick paused. I felt a chill despite the heat of the fire. He must not be captured at any cost, I exclaimed. Mr. Jaggers and I are of the similar opinion. It is exactly why when you were tonight, Mr. Herbert and I made the arrangements for the visitor to be shifted from his room near here to a house by the river. Mr. Jaggers was of the view that someone might follow you, harbouring the hope of being led to the visitor. Hence the visitor's switch was made without you around. Mr. Wemmick smiled for an instant, as if gratified by the thought of the move and its success, but it became serious again. But there is a lot to be done, he said. Yes, I replied wildly. He must be taken out of London. I have decided to do just that, and I shall leave him as he will not do otherwise. Good, Mr. Wemmick proclaimed. But I am sure that the haste will not help in such a situation. We must make careful plans. Mr. Jaggers absolutely insists on that. He will get in touch with you regarding the best moment to leave. One more thing, do not mention the name of Campy Sun to your visitor. If he discovers that this particular man is in London, the visitor will refuse to leave until he has tracked Campy Sun down, and Mr. Wemmick paused to move his hand across his throat in a cutting motion. I stared into the fire after Mr. Wemmick had left, as if the flames would offer a method by which Magwitch would be smuggled out of England. Herbert entered just then. He had gone to pay a visit to his beloved Clara, who lived with her invalid father beside the river. The old man enjoyed the view of passing ships from his window. I was struck by an idea as Herbert spoke. That's the perfect house. We could row Magwitch out on the river from there and transfer both of us and me to a ship bound for any destination. There are captains who can do anything for money, and I know how to keep their mouths shut, I exclaimed. Herbert was equally excited about my plan. You must purchase a boat. We will row on the river every day till people there get used to seeing us. Thus, on the day of our escape, there will be no eyebrows raised and no comments made on the spotting our boat, he suggested. I bought a boat that very next day and we started rowing. We did not row for a long initially, as our muscles needed to get habituated to pulling an oar. I returned Magwitch's purse of money through Herbert and visited him using a roundabout route later. I made sure no one had followed me. I met Clara Barley soon. She was a sweet girl with a round, pretty face. I congratulated Herbert later on his fine choice, and he went red in face of happiness in my praise of Clara. Magwitch appeared somewhat overpowered by the need to shift his living quarters. He protested meekly, but I managed to convince him that this was not a good time to draw attention to ourselves by the purchase of a flashy carriage and horses. His protestations grew stronger when I revealed my plans to smuggle him out of London. And when it dawned on him that I was to accompany him, he became reasonable and acceptable to everything. Clasping my hand in his, he held it till I had to leave. I did not give him any indication that I intended to separate from him once he was safely out of London. My financial situation was in dire straits now, and I was forced to sell off some jewellery, but it still wasn't enough to meet all my requirements. As the situation was hopeless, I decided to take Miss Havisham's help to pay off the contract with Claricus for Herbert. I halted at Mr. Jagger's office on my way to the coach station to inform him about my plan. He approved of it but also warned me, "Don't be in too much of a rush. A big city like London is the best place to hide," he suggested. As we were about to end our conversation, Jagger's servant Molly came in with his lunch. She put the tray down on a small table with her head down. As I rose to leave, I brushed against the tray, which led to the soup being splashed over its bowl a little. Molly's head sprang up with anger at this unintentional act of mine, and her eyes flashed fire at me for a second. Then her rage subsided, but that fleeting lapse of rage made me gulp as I saw in Molly's eyes the exact replica of Estella's angry, scornful eyes. The features of her nose and cheeks resembled Estella's features greatly. In fact, they were exactly the same. I took Mr. Wemmick aside after I had finished speaking with Mr. Jaggers and asked him who Molly really was. "A murderess," he whispered. "Mr. Jaggers got her acquitted as her lawyer. The jealousy of her husband caused her to commit the crime. She is supposed to have murdered their child as well."